My wife has been peeking at me from around corners and behind furniture. It's gone from weird to downright terrifying. My wife Lynn and I have been together for 6 years and have been married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and I never once have I noticed any weird behavior or something you could call a red flag. I mean, I can't stress enough just how out of character this whole thing is for her. You see, Lynn is a very kind and intelligent and thoughtful person. She's always been the no-nonsense type. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror movies. And she was so scared that she didn't even make it halfway through the movie. I mean, she isn't into anything creepy. She's never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And I mean, that's fine, but that's what's so strange about this. It's so unlike her. I should also add that she's never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I mean, I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but it's been 6 years. I think I would have seen some sort of sign. But this all started about 2 months ago. That morning I was in the kitchen and making myself a cup of coffee before work. I was running a bit late, so I knew I couldn't make it to some Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. So I was sipping my coffee, hurrying down the hall towards the front door. And then I noticed something. Around one of the corners ahead of me, there was a pair of eyes, surrounded by strands of long dark hair hanging against the wall. It was clearly Lynn, but the rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her, but I did burn the hell out of my lips. "Geez," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants where I'd spilled it, and said, "You scared the hell out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that's been caught. I heard her scurrying off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. I mean, it was really weird and totally out of character for her, but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. So I shouted out to her, "I love you, and you damn weirdo." And then I shut the door behind me, and I could hear faintly her laughing in the background. I mean, her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I'd forgotten all about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't even bring it up, and neither did she. Life went on. And the next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning, and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, juggling some OJ in my hands, and I felt a strong feeling like something was watching me. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes, and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed. I'll admit, I was not out of irritation, but a genuine fear. For some reason, at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her. I didn't even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what the hell had possessed her to do that. It took me a little bit longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but eventually I did, and when I got to her bedroom, she was lying on her side, fast asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her, breathing, just to make sure she was really asleep, and I got the feeling she might jump out at me at the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I dreamt the whole thing up. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again from over there," I said, pointing at the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the hell out sometimes, you know that?" I said as giggling and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased back. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sound her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or the living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not even have known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She had the lid propped up just enough so that only half her face peeked through, and she had been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving, but I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth she was doing this, and she didn't answer, but she just slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away feeling very disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but at least it made her happy, so I just hoped she would tire of this game. And it seemed like she did. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't catch her peeking at me once. And I was starting to think that just maybe she was done with this weird prank. And I was, well, quite relieved. Then one night when we were watching a show on Netflix, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game, she looked at me with this small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel really paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching me around the corners, behind the doors. I was jumpy whenever I got home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and, honestly, a little bit crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I started to relax again. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it must have just been a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. You see, Lynn left to go to a friend of hers, and I was lounging on the couch and played a couple of games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a damn heart attack. Lynn was peering from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, and the ends dripped with water. But her mouth, it just hung open in this terrible grin, eyes wide and red as if she hadn't been blinking for a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black smears. She just looked giddy and completely deranged. I don't think I've ever been so terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Then finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the shower curtain as she moved backwards towards the door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for well over an hour, Maybe I overreacted, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with this crazy stuff anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in the bathroom, stopping ever so often to listen at the door for a few minutes at a time. Suddenly I heard a muffled sound. I pressed my ear against the bathroom door and strained to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. And I started to get angry. I was beyond pissed. She was making me feel scared to be in my very own house and made me hide in this bathroom for hours. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was a damn awful one. What the hell, Lynn? I snapped. This is getting so annoying. I waited for her to apologize or call me a jerk, but instead I heard a faint moan. So quietly I wondered if I'd heard it at all, and then complete silence. Lynn? I called out. I couldn't even hide the shaking in my own voice, and I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear, just stop it already. I yelled. I pounded my fists on the door. I waited for it to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I'd never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a damn lifetime when you're scared. But finally I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom. So I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I was almost expecting to see her face peering back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. So I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers, and I was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me nauseous to think about. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door, as if in slow motion, and locked eyes with my wife, who was peering at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still as wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could, all the way down the steps, snatching my keys and my phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I just drove straight away from the house as fast as I could. Faster than I legally should have been. Shivering the entire time, either from fear or cold, maybe a little bit of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house. It was about 40 minutes away. I ignored every call and text I got. I didn't even check my phone until I was safely parked in his driveway. Then it called 4 times and sent a flurry of text, all wondering where I'd gone and why I'd left like that. I threw my phone against the dash in rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, of course, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. He even lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him that Lynn and I had a fight, but it didn't go into the details. I didn't want him thinking I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her over the years to lighten up instead of being so serious? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but it was definitely not what I had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside that closet. Knowing she'd been there with me the entire time, it made my skin crawl. She never left the bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me some severe anxiety. I was tossing and turning, unable to sleep, and in the end, Chris gave me some pills so that I could get a little bit of shut-eye. But my sleep was filled with the most terrible dream. All of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do anything like that ever again. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling and my heart was in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling, almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile, drool dribbling from her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there for quite a while. Maybe even the whole night. I didn't bother screaming. I wasn't afraid this time. Anger had trumped any fear I had. In that moment, I jumped up from the couch and I pounded my palm against the glass. Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home now. She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from her place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the stairs, and when I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all is those 2 streaks of drool still dribbling down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through the window. They were skeptical. I mean, who wouldn't be? So Chris took me outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animals probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't agree. He and Rebecca assumed I had dreamt the entire episode, and they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell phone off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I had really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her. That no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. And that thought saddened me to my core. I cried for most of the morning, but by noon I'd figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after the 6 years we've had. So I turned my phone on and saw 12 texts from her. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. And more of the same. All of the texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy stuff she just pulled. Like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. But something was wrong. She would never send these types of short messages. She would always send these long paragraphs. And you'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from the situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some sort of wild animal, grinning at me from inside that closet like a lunatic. And then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until noon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can't be mended? Rebecca asked me. She made us both sandwiches for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know. It's just, she's like a different person. I chose my words carefully because I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the craziness she had pulled. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacekeeper. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I can't trust her anymore. Those words, they stung my heart. I missed my wife, but how could I live with someone like that, living in constant fear? Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, Rebecca said, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. Well, she certainly seems like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. It's very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca was saying, slowly shaking her head. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when it did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? My mouth was suddenly very dry. Rebecca casually nodded as if the fact wasn't nightmare fuel. I suppose it wasn't for her. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say to you? Did she come inside? The sweat was breaking out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. No, she just wanted to know if you were awake yet, and I said you weren't. And then I asked if she wanted me to wake you up, but she said no, I should just leave you to sleep. Is that all? She didn't say anything else? No, she seemed awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should give her a call. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? And clearly she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I had to try to get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she's been, she hadn't committed any crimes. Not yet, anyways. The police would probably say that I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong. Maybe even dangerous. Like there was something sinister behind that smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed. But what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. And as long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt so lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Mariana, and I were never on the best of terms. We never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move in a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I had only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me and her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, and she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company was almost unbearable. It's like walking on glass. And I was glad when we moved 3 states away so I didn't have to see her as often, and I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I didn't really want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to do. "Yes," she answered, sounding irritated. "Mariana, it's me, it's Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear the click of her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something... It's a bit difficult to follow your ramblings, Benjamin. What is it that you want from me?" she asked, and I could almost see her standing there with that thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you've ever noticed any odd behaviors or any mental health issues." There was this long, uncomfortable pause, and I could tell that was because she was thinking. Or maybe something else? Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now I have business to attend to, as I said, so if you don't mind," she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. "Mariana, this is not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I was worried about her and figured, as her mother, you would be as well." I was clearly frustrated at this point. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what to expect of me," she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had this feeling she knew a lot more than she was letting on. "Please, if not for me, then do it for Lynn." I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath as if she was trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Mariana, what's wrong?" "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." I tried to call out to her, but she hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed, but after a while I gave up. Until I remembered her last words to me. "Seek professional help." She said those words with a bit of urgency. It could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed, ever so slightly when she said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to something else. Something that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. I mean, maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausted conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced him that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into that yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They just wanted to help. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. I mean, it was weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that, Lynn has to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going to that house alone. So we drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. And when we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began to do somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar after all. And for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and started sweating, and Chris was fine, though. He seemed great. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets, like he was going on a damn stroll for the park. I envy his ignorance. I pushed the door open and immediately was hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and we walked into the house, and his nose was scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floor around here? Damn," Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting for any sign of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed tight, refusing to let any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I would have thought the house had been abandoned. We moved through each floor, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the hell are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a complete moron. "Just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head, but followed up the stairs to check the bathroom and the spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of our wedding portraits that was hung up on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly. All the glass was removed. I stared at the picture and a lump formed in my throat. We had taken that photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at her beautiful face, and I never dreamt her face would ever be a source of terror. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I hesitated to go into the bedroom. My fear from that night came back to me all at once. Chris noticed, and he offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So together we walked in, checked the closets and the showers. The bathroom looked as it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you try to pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something?" I nodded along with Chris and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. And then, when I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell. I gagged. Chris took one look and lost all the color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside her bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought it was bad with Rebecca's shoe addiction, but whoa, your wife is in here collecting eyeballs. Chris gagged. "Ben, I think we should go. I'm getting nauseous here." "All right," I said back to him. I grabbed my duffel bag and I shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. "Who the hell lines up eyeballs in their closet like that?" Chris was mumbling. I tried to tell you she needs help." "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a bloody exorcist." He paused. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any..." The words died in his throat and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Chris?" I whispered out as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccup sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Every part of me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married, and I had to help her. "Lynn?" I asked, but she didn't respond. But her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little motions as if she was nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn." I took another step closer, and she let out a tiny moan. And I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she could barely contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? Are you bleeding?" She bobbed her head, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust, and the smell coming off of her was revolting. I could even feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in that state. I scooted closer, and I reached out. The excited hiccuping sound got louder, and her hand shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from between her fingers. "My God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said instinctively. I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down on the carpet. I looked back and, in shock, saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris. The way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was hanging wide open in a twisted snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off of her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast, scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run, go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that had been my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom door, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Lynn, you're playing hide and seek, right?" Chris asked. I reached back and pushed him towards the step. "Move, Chris, now," I said quietly, but as firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in a fast, sharp motion and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider. It was almost like her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris muttering a prayer as he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top step, struck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help you." I was holding back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2, maybe 3 at a time. I made it to the front door. Then I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear, so I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt the searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to the car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word, I just ran to my car and jumped in. He took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror. I was so sure I'd see her there, running after us. But that didn't happen. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches on my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked so many questions. They went back to my house and searched, but of course, Lynn was gone. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and maybe file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow, I knew. I dropped Chris off at home and I went to a motel that's about an hour away. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her, maybe they'd get her the help she deserves. But I don't think so anymore. Because 40 minutes ago, I got a text from an unknown number with just 3 words. I found you. And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I knew exactly what I was looking at. There was no mistake. It was my wife's eye. So I decided I'll make this recording and I'll put it out there immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm all alone and I'm scared. And I can't help but feel I'm being watched. Please, help me.